How did the
spider web
was it
tights.
obvious that it was a wig?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I was
It was
having
a terrible
fun.
wig.
See, this is exactly why we have them on the show, and this is what makes them fun.
You're listening to KXVS, the voice of Stockton, 92.1 FM.
This is Darius Oliver, and you're listening to 92.1 KXVS, the voice of Stockton.
This broadcast will start in 60 seconds. This broadcast will start in 45 seconds. This broadcast will start in 30 seconds. This broadcast will start in 15 seconds. This broadcast will start in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The Voice of Stockton. For more information on The Voice of Stockton, go to thevoiceofstockton.org.
The views and opinions expressed in the following program do not necessarily reflect those of KXVS The Voice of Stockton or its parents, affiliates, management, and staff.
Hi everyone, this is Cliff Deba
And I'm Ben Sanchez, and you are listening to Challenge Mode
on KXVS, the voice of Stockton.
You're listening to Challenge Mode with Ben Sanchez. Take it away, Ben.
Thank you, Dustin. That was Dustin on the intros. As always, you're tuned into Challenge Mode. In case you guys have forgot, or hopefully you didn't forget, this is the show that covers entrepreneurship. We dive into the world of entrepreneurs, and we follow their experiences, their passions, their dreams to see if they can overcome the next set of challenges in starting a small business. And so today is really an incredible episode because I have the man, the myth, the legend, the legendary Professor Dave Frederickson with me from UOP, who taught me everything I need to know about PR. How are you doing, Dave?
I'm doing great. Can I put you down for my eulogy?
I'm there. Well, I don't want to be there, but I can, deliver if I need to.
That was well said.
Yeah, I mean, you really are an inspiration to a lot of students at UOP, even though you were only there for limited capacity. So kind of share with everyone a little bit about your backstory, about how you came up in journalism.
Well, to put it in my mother's words, why can't you keep a job, David? That was her take on all of it. Mm-hmm. But it really was a kind of a fascinating story, I think. I started out to be a physician. Mm-hmm. And so I majored in organic chemistry. But I had this fascination with stories about people. And in high school, I had been a journalist.
Yeah.
And I had really gotten into doing stories that interested me. So I got involved with the Pacific newspaper, and one thing led to another, and I minored in journalism communications.
Okay.
And then I went off to practice chemistry, and I was away from journalism and communications for some time. But I got pulled back into it in my chemistry career by people that needed writing skills.
Okay, yeah.
So I sort of began as a technical writer-editor,
mm-hmm.
and from there I evolved into technical advertising and marketing,
mm-hmm.
and one thing led to another, and then I sort of did a little side trip into politics.
Yeah.
And that worked so well that the next thing I knew, I had made that transition pretty much complete. So I wound up actually going from a congressional candidate and member to from there directly to the White House as a member of Ronald Nelson's staff when he was press secretary. So that's kind of the short version of the long story.
Yeah. And it is quite a story, and like we were talking out there, I really think you, if you had the time, could do a podcast, and with as much experience as you have out there in the field and with everything you've taught, I think that can go on for a long time.
Well, I did that actually. I had not a podcast, but I had the good fortune to do a weekly public affairs show, much like This Week, or one of the current weekend shows in Houston for 12 and a half years. I did the show every week, and we did newsmakers, and we did issues, and we did all those sorts of things. I remember several times I did all of the mayors for all of the candidates for Houston mayor. And the most interesting one I ever had came to the studio with a broom. And he got set up on the set.
Yeah.
And he was brought down to do his little interview, and he set the broom between us. And I said, "Excuse me, but could you explain to me what that broom is?" He said, "Oh, yes, that's the broom I'm going to sweep out City Hall with." So even then, we were getting people who were going to fix things. But I did 12 and a half years of that. And then in Washington, I had the good fortune to create a television show with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce through my presence at the Small Business Administration, called Small Business Report.
Oh, okay.
And we did Small Business Report on it was a monthly news magazine. We did that for 3 years that I did, and that was syndicated throughout the country. At one time, we were on about 400 commercial stations, and I don't know how many PBS and non-commercial stations. And then I had one more opportunity to create a show when I was at the Department of Transportation, and that show was called Third Friday Report. And it was on the transportation issues of the country. And we did that as actually a satellite show,
right,
to all of the DOT partners and affiliates, and then we were on something called American Trucker TV.
Ah, okay.
I don't know if you ever heard of that, but that was an early day point-to-point satellite television network that fed all of the truck stops in the country. So I was big amongst the truckers.
There you go.
So anyway, just a little background.
Yeah. So, every guest that I usually have on the show, because it's so entrepreneur-based, I like to pick their brain about what they think an entrepreneur is. What do you think an entrepreneur is when it comes to mind?
Well, from my 2 stints at the Small Business Administration, I would say that entrepreneurs are people who are passionate about success in business. And I think true entrepreneurs are passionate about innovation and finding new opportunities in business. The best way to describe, in my mind, an entrepreneur is just to talk about some people like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Martha Stewart and Oprah Winfrey.
Yeah.
And the fact that these are people who just didn't take no for an answer, because they had a vision of something they could do, produce, provide, and they just went about doing it until it was done. And I think that's what entrepreneurs are.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think that I get a sense of that from every person, we've had on the show, and the importance of that. Now, how long have you been a part of the community here?
Well, I've been back in Stockton since 2005 when I came back to the University of the Pacific, and I've been here more or less most of the time, although early on we spent a good deal of time back and forth between here and Washington.
Right.
So I've been here quite a bit, and I think that Stockton has some very promising opportunities in entrepreneurship and small business.
Yeah. What kind of have you seen since you've been around Stockton? Something that really kind of stands out to you?
Well, I'll tell you two small businesses that I find very interesting. One is Werlo's.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I think that Lisa and Mike Werlo are extraordinary small business people. They are good examples of impassioned entrepreneurs. They live it, they breathe it, and they are always involved in it.
Yeah.
And the other one may surprise you because it doesn't seem like a traditional small business, but I think Tim Ulmer is a remarkable small business person. I watch the way he uses his talents and his skills in a community-based kind of relationship, and I'm just really amazed at what he has done with his business.
Yeah.
Those are two that I've happened to notice.
Yeah. No, those are really, really great examples because, Tim's been in the community. He's all over. He's at every community event, always catch him behind the lens, capturing all these incredible moments from, not just chamber events, but just all kinds of community events.
I don't know when he ever gets any sleep.
Yeah,
I really don't. Between the taking and the processing and the posting, I'm just astonished at how much he gets done.
Yeah, and then Werlo's has been on the Miracle Mile for quite some time too, and they've done an incredible job, with expanding and marketing and staying relevant on the. We know how the mile is all. I feel like, we got some businesses and some come and go, but I feel like they've really stood the test of time here for several years.
Well, I think another very interesting entrepreneurial story in this community is the story of Fritz Groupie. I guess when you think about Werlo's and you think about Tim Ulmer, you're looking at entrepreneurship sort of in the early generational development of it. And when you look at Fritz Groupie, you're looking at a mature entrepreneur. But if you do the backstory on his success and you go back and you realize that he started out small, he started out selling subdivision homes and decided that he could do a better job of those homes, and then when you see what he has done and the way he has built an international presence, and of course continues to be engaged in the Stockton community with Lincoln Village and all the stuff that goes with that, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And of course, I guess we've had other examples of that too. The Spanos family and what they've done, and so that I think is a good illustration of a principle that I believe very strongly in. Every great business enterprise started as a small business.
Yes, exactly right.
It's that simple.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I had the pleasure of doing in my last life at the Small Business Administration was in 2003 I got to chair the committee that selected the Golden Anniversary Hall of Fame. These were 25 businesses that we chose on our 50th anniversary to honor as 25 of the best, finest small businesses ever created with the help of the Small Business Administration.
Okay.
And I tell you, it's extraordinary. Every one of those businesses had its own story.
Yes.
Just amazing.
Yeah.
To see what the people had done, not the least of which was FedEx.
Huh, really?
Yes, yes. If you'd like, I can tell you a little story about that.
Yes, please.
Well, when I was first at the SBA during the Reagan years, I sat on the National Small Business Person of the Year Committee, where we selected the Small Business Person of the Year and honored them. Well, one of the nominations that came in was from something called FedEx, a fellow named Fred Smith. And I have to tell you that the selection committee passed his entry around and thought about it and talked about it. And somebody said, well, what's a FedEx? And somebody else said, I have no idea. And so Fred Smith and FedEx were set aside and not selected as the Small Business Person of the Year. This would have been 1982 or 83.
Okay.
Now, fast forward, 2003, FedEx was a unanimous selection for the Golden Anniversary Hall of Fame.
Right.
That was exactly 20 years later. That's what small business is about.
Yes. That's incredible. And just for you to be a part of that and to, see that and meet him and see, hear about his idea, and then 20 years later, who would have thought, right?
Well, and there's a famous story about the fact that he got a bad grade on his proposal at Harvard Business School because the professor said this could never happen.
And he didn't take no for an answer, did he?
He didn't take no for an answer, not for a moment.
Yeah, and here we are.
So I FedEx stuff every week somewhere.
And so, and this is what's great about having you on the show, because now we'll get right into it with PR, because that's really, when I started at EOP, a good chunk of what I was learning was definitely the cornerstone, you and Dr. Hackley with PR. There's a lot to cover in that, but we'll kind of narrow a couple of things down, and maybe some of your final years there. And how has this whole landscape changed in PR for students now?
Well, that's a good question, Ben, because you were a very good student in my class and in Carol Ann's classes. And, you've been out practicing now for a number of years, you and people like Chris
K.
who
and
was also, and Leah Myers.
Myers in Sacramento, and of course Renee here.
Oh yeah, Renee.
Do Rise and Shine 209.
I had some extraordinary students. As a matter of fact, one of my students, whom you may have known, named Summer Irvin.
Okay. Yeah, it rings a bell.
Is this week at Cambridge University, where she's taking a short course in media law.
Okay.
And she's currently in law school in Australia.
Wow.
But I think that from a standpoint of what has happened to public relations, the fact is that public relations has become ever more important as the structured media has sort of been displaced by this phenomenon we call social media.
Right.
There was a time, and I remember it well, where in a typical local market, there were 3 television stations, and there were maybe a half a dozen to a dozen radio stations, and there was 1, maybe 2 newspapers. And so businesses could really plot their marketing and advertising course very carefully by just sitting down with those media outlets and working out a suitable mix that would advertise their products and services. And they were quite able to do that because those media outlets were confined to that community.
Right.
Well, fast forward to today, we have innumerable media outlets, hundreds of cable and satellite and point-to-point television outlets and hundreds of radio, streaming radio. I listen to TuneIn radio a lot.
Yes.
And I can listen to anybody in the world anytime,
Right.
basically for free. And so now the local advertiser is confronted by a veritable sea of difficult choices, and also the cost of those choices has gone up exponentially because you can't just buy the local market. You got to buy, whatever. And so it's become much harder for the local small business entrepreneur to know where and how to spend what precious media dollars they actually have.
Exactly, right.
And so to me, that means PR, public relations, has got to fill a far greater void, and it's got to be a far more effective tool, especially for small businesses and entrepreneurs. That's just kind of my take on it.
Yeah. No, I think you're there. I mean, what do you tell? What did you tell the students when kind of what are the key topics that came up with students when you were looking at this?
Well, you know the old adage, don't you, that everything old is new again, and everything comes back around. And I think that what I see today is very reminiscent of a piece of advice one of my early on mentors gave me, and it's nothing, it's nothing unknown. Everybody's sort of said it at one time or another. The best way to get ahead is by doing well to do good, or to do good by doing well.
Right.
And I think that is what we're seeing more and more at this local level of media and of business. I think that small businesses today, especially, have got to identify within their community those community activities to which they most closely can identify, and then in the way of public relations, PR, they have to get engaged.
Exactly.
I had the good fortune to be heavily involved in creating a program at the University of the Pacific called Beyond Our Gates into the community.
Yes. Do you want to kind of go into that a little bit of what Beyond Our Gates? When was it established, and kind of what does it do?
Well, we were able to establish in 2009. It came about as a result of the fact that our new president, Pam Ibeck, really wanted to have a community presence.
Right.
And the name of it came about because of a column that was written by Mike Fitzgerald, which he didn't even realize he was doing this. He wrote a column in which he talked about Pacific was behind the wall, behind the gates.
Yes, and many Stocktonians know that, even as I was growing up, before I even, I never thought I would go to UOP myself, but that was something that we, as in locals, always felt. UOP was in this gated area. That was a perception.
Well, little did he know that he would become our challenge.
Yeah.
Because we really pulled out that column and reread it several times as we were working on this, and it began to really sink in on us that by really turning that around and saying, hey, we're going to get out beyond these gates. We're going to get out into the community.
Right.
And so our first effort at that was to create a series of forums for the benefit of our new president and also for the people that we wanted involved in participating. And those forums covered critical issues in Stockton: health care, economic development, the environment, education, the arts. And so we did this series of forums in which we brought together leaders from the community and leaders from the university campuses, not just Stockton, but also the dental school and the law school.
Mm-hmm.
And we had those forums in an environment in which we had an audience, and in which the president could listen and participate and give intake and input, and that brought the group together, the campus and the town and gowns, as it were.
Right.
And it went over, I think, very well. There was great enthusiasm and good reception for it.
Right.
Well, then you have to do, what happens next?
Yes.
And so the next became a tougher challenge, and so it took some time to work it through. And at the end of the day, the university established the Beyond Our Gates Community Council.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very pleased to say that today it's going strong. There's a Facebook page that's basically called Beyond Our Gates, and of course the main thrust of the council has been early literacy the last several years here, because that was an issue that was identified as one of the most critical needs of the Stockton area.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how that has emerged, and it certainly is not all that the council is concerned with or involved with, but that's a good example of doing good to do well.
Right.
And it's also a good example of how community organizations and small businesses have to really sort of become more and more reliant upon each other.
Right.
And so PR becomes really just good community service and good community engagement.
Right.
And I think that is one of the things that helps with. And now we're talking about PR in the local context.
Yes.
If you're talking about the broader context,
Right.
the most successful PR campaign I've ever seen in my lifetime is the Susan B. Komen cancer crusade.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes. Yeah.
I never thought that I would ever live to see so many pink ribbons and pink shoes and all that sort of
Right.
thing.
Yeah. I mean,
Enormously successful PR campaign.
they've really done a lot of great work to put that all together and to champion a lot of people behind them for that. I think it's that, and that's just one great example across the board. When you're talking to students about things like that, are those examples that you pull from, or what other examples would you give them, like as far as different case studies to look at that are great PR campaigns that may help them?
Well, I think that's one I've used a lot, the Susan B. Komen campaign. And another one that I think is equally of interest to me is the campaign that has been run by the National Football League. This get kids out and get them moving. I mean, again, it's a community-based thing. I mean, you bring these name athletes together with community activists, community fitness people, and with for a while there with the First Lady Michelle Obama, and you really mobilize an army of people.
Yeah.
To get involved, and I think that is today kind of one of those things that really drives good, successful PR. Another campaign that's not so big now, but that I was involved in years past, that I think was tremendously successful in this country, was the Jerry Lewis's muscular dystrophy telethons. Again, they had this country organized down to, block to block almost. Now, some people said that was awfully mercenary. Well, having met Jerry Lewis and Ed McMahon and been to Las Vegas and watched that operation, I have to acknowledge it was highly pressurized to produce results. But the fact is that they understood this need to really get right down to the grassroots level
Right.
and engage people more than just talk to them.
Right.
I think that PR that engages people is more important than PR that talks to them,
Right.
tells them to do something.
Do you feel that students now do you feel like maybe they have a disconnect to that because of everything that's changed with technology? Like
No.
No?
No, I think I'm astonished at how much student involvement there is now. At this year's commencement, President Ibeck asked all of the students in the graduating commencement class that were involved in any way in the community over the past 4 years as students to stand. And I was amazed. Almost the entire graduating class stood.
Really?
Yeah.
That's incredible.
I thought so, because what it tells me is that people are more and more understanding that they can pick the activity that makes sense to them.
Right.
And as PR professionals, we can sort of lead, guide, and direct that activity by the messaging that we do
Right.
and the branding that we do, so that people find that home of activity where it makes sense for them.
Exactly. And I remember even in, several courses that you and Dr. Hackley had, that was something that she always hammered home. Eventually you're going to think of, a place that you really want to work, but there's always going to be something, she always used the example of I wouldn't personally work for a cigarette company to do PR for them
No, I
or
wouldn't either.
any kind
I
of
didn't.
marketing. And so it really was just at the end of the day, you had to figure it out for yourself how you wanted to be involved and where you wanted to go do it. And that was, of course, for me, that was always one thing. It's easy to tell yourself, I don't think I need to be really in this location, and I could go to Sacramento or maybe try my luck somewhere else. But I ended up staying here and figuring out what would work for me, or how can I best help, people, that are looking for either resources, connections, or information, anything like that. And, every student's going to be involved in this community in a different way. And you have to remember, too, that a lot of those UOP students aren't from Stockton.
No, they're not. And some of them go many other places. I mentioned to you when we were talking before the show, there's a young lady named Summer Irvin, who was one of my outstanding students, who this week is at University of Cambridge taking a short course in media law. This marks the third country, the third continent that she's been on in her educational quest.
Yeah.
She went to school here in the States,
Yeah.
graduating from Pacific with a degree in communication. Then she went back to her home in Australia and got an advanced degree in communication and media. And now she's in law school there in Australia. But as a part of that law school experience, she's at Cambridge this summer for a summer program.
Right.
And I think that underscores the opportunity that is now available to young people who have an interest in the communications field.
Right.
In my mind, there is greater opportunity and there is greater range of activity than I've ever seen for young people with those skills.
Right.
Because everybody has to communicate. And it's those people who have the skills, the skill sets, and the ability to manage the message and to brand the program, who now have an enormous range of opportunity.
Yeah. Expanding the PR toolkit, as you both used to say, it seems, what they would teach us is, several fundamentals, but as we get out and are on the field on our own, we're going to add more to that kit. And, I mean, obviously I didn't do radio at all when I first started there. And now look, here I am doing broadcasting, doing podcasting. I find myself writing for a small business, but I was only writing technical writing, doing documents. And then pretty soon, a shout out to Tara Coffee and Laura gave me the opportunity to write content for them. And that was not technical. It was learning about their audience, drinking coffee, spending time with people that drink coffee that came in in the center, in the Mexican Heritage Center, and talking to them on how their story unfolded. And then from there, I was able to develop more kind of creative content, which was kind of outside of the scope. But as a writer, you find yourself, I think, very adaptable. And, I'm sure there's a lot of students that, when I was starting, a lot of students were really great writers, but they weren't really good on the technical end, right? They didn't quite grasp the graphic art side, or they had no idea about the radio or the podcasting side, or little nuances. And I was wondering if you still run into that, or students I feel probably are more tech savvy now.
Well, I certainly hope so. If they're not, they're in trouble, because they're going to have to be. Mm-hmm. That's the trade-off in the world of backpack journalism.
Right.
And I can give you a prime example of that. We had a wonderful student, a remarkable student in my classes, who both was in a couple of my classes, but also worked for the Pacifican, named Natalie Compton. Mm-hmm. Natalie is now a globe-trotting, certified freelance journalist. I mean, she has been published in all of these amazing publications, Gentleman's Quarterly, and I don't know, all the different ones, mm-hmm. Munchies, and she travels the world. She's doing a lot of food stuff, and she was in Ireland and did a thing on 10 Irish whiskeys that you haven't heard of.
Yeah.
I mean, and I mean, she's living her dream.
Right, exactly.
But she carries her backpack journalism with her.
Right. Now, kind of tell the audience a little bit about what backpack journalism is.
Well, backpack journalism basically assumes that when you go out to cover story, you have all the tools that you may need to cover that story. You may need a camera, a still camera. Mm-hmm. You may need a video camera. You may need your laptop. Whatever technology it requires mm-hmm. to capture and convey that story mm-hmm. is what you have to be prepared to do as a backpack journalist.
Right.
And one of the places I've seen that change is in the way in which the White House is covered. Mm-hmm. A lot of my friends who were members of the White House press corps when I was there are still there mm-hmm. As photographers and video people. And I see it all the time now. They're much more flexible and agile on their feet. It's because you have to be. You've got to be able to do whatever the story dictates.
Right.
And that's the thing that I think has changed so much.
Mm-hmm. How about, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about, I know we didn't talk about it on the notes and we didn't talk about it out there, but I was curious what your thoughts are on citizen journalism today.
Well, quite honestly, I don't know how to define citizen journalism. One of my irreverent friends says citizen journalism is gossip on the internet. and I think that many days that's not too far off.
Mm-hmm, right.
And I think that's a danger that we run.
That is.
One of the reasons I think there's such a conversation going on right now about fake news and about whether or not sources are reliable mm-hmm. is because there is a great deal of uncertainty mm-hmm. and there is a great deal of room for mischief.
Right.
And there is a great deal of room for misinformation mm-hmm. on the internet in general and on social media sites particularly. Mm-hmm. I don't envy Facebook trying to find a way to put some kind of filters on their members that are going to reflect in accurate, honest, truthful news and information. That's tough.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is, because, that's such a huge issue now, and, for, that affects everyone across the board, with all this misinformation that's spread out there. And it's kind of hard to gauge that. And I feel that if people don't take the time to kind of do the due diligence for themselves and figure things out, and there's always, you're getting information from Twitter, you're getting information from Facebook, now we're getting information from Instagram, and all of these different things are coming at us, and how do we know what is something that I think people have to take the time and sit down and figure out where these sources are coming from. I think it's a little easier if you know that a citizen is working with a news outlet, right? They may not actually technically work with, at the news outlet, but they're providing information, and they're working together and collaborating to publish a story, whether it's on their blog or however they're going to do that, versus, Joe Bonk around the corner that just scribbled something down and then decided it was, newsworthy and put it on Facebook.
Well, we've always had that. I mean, I began my career as a stringer for the local newspaper on sports. I did sports for that paper as a stringer. A stringer being somebody that didn't have an official job but got paid by the column inch.
Right, yeah.
But here's what's changed, and this is the part that scares me. We had editors.
Exactly.
We had filters. We had responsible and reliable people in the newsroom who got all of that stuff in hand and sorted it and went through it and edited it and made sure that the content was timely, accurate, and truthful. What we see today on social media is so far removed from that.
Right.
And even the news organizations, I think that in my mind, more than necessarily being false or phony or fake or whatever, the thing that worries me the most is that even news organizations like CNN and CNBC and Fox News and the rest of them rush to air without proper editorial filtration. There's such pressure, there's such a demand to get it out there that they go to air, they go to the viewer, to the reader, to the consumer of news before they have properly vetted it, or before there has been a proper opportunity for editorial review and analysis.
Right.
And the other thing that worries me is that too many people considering themselves as journalists today are really not journalists, they are advocates. They're advocating for this thing or that thing.
Right.
As a journalism student, I was taught who, what, where, when, why, and how. Period. That's news.
Yeah.
If you get beyond that into what you think about it and how you feel about it, it better go on the editorial page.
Yeah, there's a bias there.
Yeah, it better go to the editorial page, and there better be an editor that's going to review it and sign off on it before it gets there.
Right.
Nowadays, this stuff just kind of happens because everybody's a somebody. We have celebrity journalists.
Yes.
And I just worry greatly about that. And I say that when some of those people are friends and colleagues of mine that I've known for many years, and I don't begrudge them their position now to be in that position where they can pontificate or state their opinions. And I'm not throwing rocks at any one particular political point of view or anything else. I just think that objective news has to be preserved and maintained and disseminated as such.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Plenty of room for the rest of it.
Right, exactly. And I know we kind of got a little off track on that, but I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on it before we hit up a few more questions and wrap up here. One of the things I wanted to know is that as far as this entrepreneurship is not new, and startups are not new, and co-working spaces are not new, but I feel like it's new to myself in the last several years that I've been involved in it. And I was just curious if you have students that show interest in that, or if you make recommendations for students maybe to get involved with things like that.
Well, of course, you may remember I tell every student that I'm involved with that they need to get out there and do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's fine to have theory. It's fine to have instruction. It's fine to have how-to manuals in front of you. But you really have to get out there and do it.
Mm-hmm.
And in that same vein, I think that students today need to be looking for opportunities for internships, externships, whatever you want to call them.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't have one, they need to make one.
There you go.
If they don't have one, they need to find an organization that they believe in, that they like, and that they think should be doing a better job, and go say, hey, look, I'm here. I'm going to work for you.
Right.
I mean, I did that when I was that age. I mean, and the fact is that if you really believe in something strongly, and if you really think that you have something to add to it, then there's nothing dishonorable about making yourself a worthy volunteer.
Right.
And many people that I know in the PR and news business and communications business started out exactly that way, by attaching themselves to something that they believed in. I was a young man who there's a friend of mine, a fellow named Mark Weinberg, who just published a wonderful book about his evenings with the Reagans in the movie theater. Movie Nights with the Reagans, I think is the title.
Okay.
Mark came to my attention when he came as a volunteer to work in the press office of John Connolly in Northern Virginia when he was a student at George Washington University. Now, the reason that Mark caught my attention was that, A, he said he was going to work for us whether we wanted him to or not, because he thought he needed that experience. And so we sort of said, okay, well, fine.
Yeah.
And the next thing I knew, he had brought his sleeping bag with him, and he sometimes wound up sleeping in his sleeping bag in the corner of the press office. And, he lived off of Mickey D's and whatever.
Literally backpack journalism.
But, long story short, Mark Weinberg became the assistant press secretary to President Ronald Reagan.
Wow.
And when the Reagans were leaving Washington and leaving the White House, he was hired as their press secretary in the post-presidency and served with them for quite a number of years out in California before going on to his further career. But, sometimes it's that passion, it's that desire, it's that want-to-do
Yeah.
that gets people way ahead of have to do.
Right.
Nobody has to give you a job,
No.
but a lot of people will give you an opportunity.
Yeah.
And so that's my advice to young people is get out there, get involved, be responsible, learn the skills, learn the messages that the organization believes in.
Be professional.
Be professional.
Do you find that a lacking nowadays, professionalism?
Yes. I worry about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry, but a lot of young people have not yet learned that their opinion doesn't amount to a hill of beans until they back it up
Yeah.
with some kind of credibility. And credibility comes from professionalism.
Right, exactly. Now, what do you think, as far as PR, what can small business owners, what are some of the key things they can take away from PR? Where can they go, or what should they be looking at, as far as resources, information, or even, coming or talking to someone, like myself, or getting someone with that skill set, or, because how entrepreneurs are, a lot of them are learning on the fly, and they're learning from each other, or they're doing it on their own. And so kind of, what do you think, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I think any entrepreneur worth their salt today has got to be aware of their need for a public awares or a public relations presence. And I think that regardless of how well off they are or how much startup money they have or whatever, they have to have a communications component to what they're doing. And quite honestly, I think that one of the best places to find that is in good, solid internships that they can effect with their local colleges and universities like Pacific and Delta.
Yeah.
And I think that they really need they need to do themselves a service and go looking for that.
Right.
The other thing I really believe strongly in is that small business entrepreneurs really do have to sit down as a part of their business planning process and really flesh out what it is they're trying to do. What will success look like when they get there?
Right.
And how do they message that? How do they brand that? How do they convey that to their publics that they're working with? And public relations is a much less expensive way and more effective way for most small businesses today to get what they need than paid advertising. Because, for instance, in a market like Stockton, there really is not a lot of paid media here that they can afford to buy. If they want to be on television, they got to buy it in Sacramento, and it's higher than they can afford.
Right.
Even on radio here, the options are limited, and certainly with the newspaper situation we have, you have only the Stockton Record, and I'm not saying that's bad. It's better than nothing.
Yeah.
And actually, the Stockton Record does a great job of local advertising. I know because I get that stuff in my mail every week. But the truth is that public relations is a much more effective and less expensive alternative to paid advertising in a community such as Stockton with small businesses and family-owned businesses.
Yeah.
Is what I think.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I've been working with small business, and I think there's always that, like we talked about earlier, you're figuring out your budget, where are my media dollars going to be best spent, and it's very difficult because we have so many avenues now. Obviously not so much with television or print around here, but, thinking about Instagram advertising, thinking about Facebook advertising or other avenues of online advertisements. I honestly, I still think flyers still do really well. Business cards are I definitely a well thought investment.
Oh, sure,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So print is not entirely dead if you can narrow down the key things that are really going to keep you going, like business cards if you attend mixers or flyers and things you can pass out, something tangible that the customer or your audience can have that they can keep and then set aside and hopefully contact you later. Website, seeing people have to think about websites now and the investment in that and hosting and all of those fees that kind of pile up over time. So that was something that I learned early on is, when I started with several entrepreneurs and several small businesses, they didn't have communications. Actually, here's an interesting story is I think it was the year I called you when I started at Roadfinch, which was 2016, and I was putting together that media list. Paul Rapp, I don't know if you know Paul, from UOP. He's in communications now. He was the communications guy over at Roadfinch, and then his whole dream was to go work at UOP. So he left, and I kind of filled the void for Paul. And as the CEO still likes to say, the closest thing he's ever going to get to Paul Rapp, which is, obviously Paul's had way more experience than I have, and he's does incredible work. But that I am grateful for that experience, even though I made nothing. I made it back in experience. I made it back in networking with people. I made it back in being a part of my community and getting involved and getting finding all these key organizations that I really like being a part of, and to the point of now being a board member with the Asian Chamber. So those things would have never been possible had I not taken the opportunity to say, okay, even though I'm not getting a paycheck, I still stuck it out to, help a lot of different people in the community with content and write for them pro bono. And, I don't ever regret any of those decisions, because that was really like a long-term internship for me. And I obviously wouldn't have those opportunities to get published with the Stockton Records specialty paper, The Current, which actually I have to give credit to Professor Frederickson. Had he not mentioned that, I would have never went to go inquire about it. And all I had to do was ask a question, pick up the phone, call the editor, and she says, send me a sample of your work. I had some sample work from EOP, and I got to work there for a year writing local stories about businesses and people in this community that were building on things. So I think those are incredible avenues to explore, and I'm glad you're still, telling the students that to get out there and to do those, to be a part of those things.
What I have noticed about this communications business is it's a never stop learning business.
Yeah, it really is.
The moment you quit learning, you lose your ability to be effective in some ways, because it never ceases to change. And I never thought that I would find myself in a situation where my principal tool in my life is a phone on my belt. I remember when I used to have to install phone carts at every site of a presidential visit because the press had to be able to use those payphones.
Yeah.
Well, now, my phone is my lifeline for everything.
Yeah.
And so I think that one of the things that young people today have to do is they have to commit themselves to that ongoing education. Now, that doesn't mean they have to be gearheads. That doesn't mean they have to be addicts to their handheld whatever. On the contrary, I think they have to learn what I call time management on communications.
Yeah.
And they have to be strategic in what they're trying to do with it. But there's no doubt that if I were a small business starting up or an entrepreneur thinking about such a thing, that the very first thing I would be thinking about over and above the technology and the operational aspects of that effort would be some kind of a web presence that needs to be managed by someone who knows what they're doing.
Right.
And I think a lot of young people today have opportunity they don't even know they have to make that offer to small businesses in their community that are struggling with that.
Yeah.
It's interesting. When I was at the SBA, I remember somebody doing a presentation which they showed a chart. They put up a chart, and they had a little square down here, and then they had the rest of the chart. And they said, the entrepreneur spends 90% of their time on this little square down here. The 97% of the time is the rest of the world around them. And, if you take a Bill Gates or you take a Steve Jobs or you take someone like that, you know that when they were working in the solitary hours of the night in their, in the case of Gates in his garage with Paul Allen, they're not thinking about having a communications person working for them, even though they're communicators.
I know.
And so young people sometimes have to create that interest themselves by going to small businesses and really saying to them, this is what I can do for you.
Yeah.
This is the kind of thing I can help you with. Seems to me like that's a way to get involved in the entrepreneurial soup at an early point and really have an impact on the development of that business and its growth. Grow with it.
Yeah.
So that's just something that strikes me as I watch young people today. I think there is a lot more awareness among youngsters today about entrepreneurship and about the potential for personal growth and opportunity than there used to be. I don't see people clamoring as hard now for the corporate recruiter.
World.
Yeah, for the corporate recruiter.
Yeah, and it was interesting too. I had this conversation, with a few people. That was always kind of in the back of my mind, right? To be a part of a bigger PR firm, right, like Edelman or something. And I don't know if I really want to do that, because I feel I'm learning so much. My skills are growing based on who I'm working with, as an entrepreneur, because they may bring something else to the table that I'm unaware of, and vice versa. I'm bringing content and writing skills that they don't have. So I think that's what's great about entrepreneurship, is you learn across the board, and you kind of all of you kind of grow together. And I think that's the biggest key component that may or may not be missing, is collaboration between community people and entrepreneurs.
Well, one of the things that I learned early in my career when I was in the advertising world, my partner and I opened an agency when we were quite young. And as we were building it, one of the things that we learned was that all of the best talent that we could assemble didn't work for advertising agencies. Mm-hmm. They worked for themselves. And so, in effect, what we did was we created a Rolodex of talent that we could draw upon. And these were the people that actually were the best at what they did, because as soon as they get good at what they do, most artists and writers and graphic designers and computer specialists open their own shop. They open their own little boutique, or they spin it off into their own thing. And so if you really want the talent, if you really want the skills that set you apart, you got to go find them.
Yeah.
They don't work in a 9-to-5 environment. And I've always felt like that was one of the strengths that we had in our early on successes, was finding those talents and giving them the opportunity to show what they could do.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. Well, Dr. Frederickson and I we could talk forever about all kinds of things, but unfortunately our time has come to an end for this episode. But before you go, how do people get in touch with you? How do students stay in touch with you? Facebook the easiest way to get in touch with you? You have an email?
Facebook is good. Email. My email address is pretty simple to remember. It's MediaProDF. That's in MediaPro Dave Frederickson.
There you go.
MediaProDF at AOL.com. I'm a dark ager.
Yeah, I know.
I've had that a long time.
You still have the AOL.
A long time, yeah. But I'm on Facebook, and you can find me there. And the other thing is that I'm in touch with you.
Yeah, there you go.
So you know how to reach me.
I know how to reach Professor.
I would say that for entrepreneurs that and prospective volunteers, young people, that 3 places around here that they ought to never forget are the Small Business Development Center at Delta College,
right?
Which for many years was run by my good friend Jillian Murphy.
That's right, and she just did she just retire?
Yes,
recently?
and so Nate McBride is now running it. He was her deputy, I think, before.
And I actually heard Jillian speak because she was at the community dinner in March at the Asian Chamber event.
It's a wonderful resource, just a wonderful resource for prospective small businesses and for people that are in small business. And then the other 2 are the Small Business Administration District Office, which is in Sacramento, actually in Citrus Heights.
Okay.
That's the one that serves the Sacramento area. And there's also a Small Business Administration District Office in San Francisco.
Okay.
That serves central Northern California. And there's a Small Business Regional Office in San Francisco. And all 4 of those organizations provide enormous opportunities for growth and development and training for small business entrepreneurs.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for all your your stories, and we got to learn a little bit about where all the information that I've learned when I was sitting in class. And thanks for coming out and being a part of the show, and hopefully we can get you to come back and maybe we can chat a little bit more in depth on something else, PR related.
Always glad to help out, and I have to say that I owe you a little debt of thanks for the fact that you sat through all those classes. So I appreciate that.
They were, those were probably the best classes that I was able to learn from, and of course I had a really great set of peers with me, which always makes it helpful as well when you're kind of struggling with whether or not you want to answer or ask questions. I was the type of student that I felt like I didn't ask enough questions, and then by the time I started to, it was already over. And I was already finished with Professor Frederickson. I'm still asking questions today. I'll still message him on Facebook.
I hope you'll be asking questions when you get to be my age. I am. I talk to people all the time trying to figure out how this stuff is working now. Mm-hmm. You got to do it.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for being a part of the show.
Well, thank you for having me. It's nice to be remembered.
All right, Dustin, take us out.
This has been Challenge Mode on KXVS, The Voice of Stockton. For more information on The Voice of Stockton, go to thevoiceofstockton.org. Until next time, this has been Challenge Mode.
Tell me, is it enough for you?
I know we shouldn't even be a thing. We should have walked our own separate ways, but we were always in this space. You see, madly in love with the point.
Hey everyone, this is Ben Sanchez, host of Challenge Mode, and you are listening to KXVS, The Voice of Stockton.
Hey everyone, this is Pedro Avila, founder of Roadfinch. Thanks for listening to Challenge Mode on KXVS, The Voice of Stockton.